Warning: the Hayes Nation may stimulate personal growth and prosperity. Participation is strongly advised.
Well, on the show today, there's an old saying that there's no such thing as a free lunch. Well, apparently, there's no such thing as a free cultural revolution either. For decades, Americans have been told that many of the values that built this country needed to be softened, redefined, apologized for, or thrown overboard completely. Faith should be private. Traditional masculinity, toxic. Patriotism, suspicious. Standards, exclusionary. Discipline was too harsh. Merit wasn't equitable. Disagreement became intolerance. Offense became harm. Somewhere along the way, too many good people decided it was easier to back up than stand their ground. We told ourselves we were being tolerant. We told ourselves we were keeping the peace. We told ourselves none of this really mattered because we were busy raising families, going to work, paying the mortgage, building businesses, going to church, and living our lives. Well, culture sends invoices, and you can ignore them for a generation, but eventually your children will get the bill. Today, I want to talk about that bill because it has arrived. And more importantly, I want to talk about what we do now. Now, I'm not interested in spending the next 40 minutes telling you America is doomed. I don't believe that. I believe there is an enormous difference between a country facing serious problems and a country that is finished. America isn't finished. The church isn't finished. And the American dream isn't finished. But pretending everything is fine isn't optimism either. It's denial. And denial has gotten expensive. So today, we're going to talk about how we got here, what it is costing us, and what ordinary Americans, especially Christians, can actually do about it. All that and more, and it starts right now. Okay, well, I'm your host, George Hayes, and welcome to the George Hayes Radio Podcast. Hey, we are broadcasting from the Bama One Podcast Studio in the great state of Alabama. Now, if you want to reach me directly, send me an email at georgehayes@usa.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and leave me a comment below. And finally, go to hayesnation.com to join a community of like-minded individuals who believe in faith, freedom, and prosperity. Okay, let me start with something important. I'm not blaming every problem in America on one political party, and I'm not blaming everything on one president. I'm not blaming everything on one generation either, and I'm certainly not claiming America was some perfect country 50 years ago. It wasn't. We had problems then. We have problems now. We'll have problems 50 years from now if the Lord allows us another 50 years. That's humanity. But there is a difference between acknowledging our imperfections and convincing ourselves that the foundations themselves are the problem. And I think that is where we made an enormous mistake. For years, whenever the culture became uncomfortable with, say, a traditional value, the people who believed in that value were told to move. Just a little. Don't talk about your faith here. Okay. Don't say that over there. Okay. Don't use that word. Fine. Don't challenge this idea. All right. And don't question that policy. We don't want any trouble. Every retreat seemed small enough by itself. That's how surrender usually works. Nobody walks into your house and announces, "Good afternoon, I'm here to dismantle your culture." It happens one concession at a time. The problem is that the line never stops moving. We kept moving the line so nobody would be offended. Eventually, we looked behind us and discovered there was nowhere left to stand. So, what's the answer? Americans, especially Christians and patriots, need to stop backing up. That doesn't mean being cruel. It doesn't mean being obnoxious. It doesn't mean looking for somebody to offend before breakfast. It means rediscovering a word Americans used to understand. No. No, I don't agree. No, I'm not ashamed of my faith. No, I'm not going to call something true simply because disagreement makes somebody uncomfortable. No, you don't get to bully me out of the conversation by attaching a label to me. A free society requires tolerance, but tolerance works both ways, and tolerance cannot mean one side speaks while the other side apologizes for existing. Some people say, "George, you're just complaining that society changed." No, society should change. Some things desperately needed changing. America becoming more equal before the law was good. America confronting genuine discrimination was good. Expanding opportunity was good. Correcting injustice is good. That is the promise of America working. What I'm challenging is the idea that because America failed to perfectly live up to its principles, the principles themselves should be discarded. There's an enormous difference. If your church has a bad pastor, you don't burn the Bible. And if a police officer breaks the law, you don't conclude laws are unnecessary. If a corporation cheats, you don't conclude private enterprise should disappear. And if America fails to perfectly honor equality, liberty, and individual rights, the answer isn't less equality, less liberty, and fewer individual rights. The answer is to live up to them. Now, here's one place where I think language started doing some very heavy lifting. We spent generations fighting for the principle that people should not be judged by the color of their skin. Then, somewhere along the road, parts of the American culture decided that treating people differently by race could once again be acceptable, provided the stated purpose was equity. That should make everybody uncomfortable. In 2023, the Supreme Court struck down the race-conscious admission systems used by Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The debate was complicated, but the underlying question was not. How much racial sorting are we willing to tolerate in pursuit of a result we consider desirable? I believe the answer should be as little as possible. The solution to racial discrimination cannot be permanent racial discrimination with better public relations. You want to help a poor kid? Help the poor kid. You want to improve a failing school? Improve the school. You want disadvantaged Americans to compete? Give them the tools to compete. But don't tell a child that race should determine how we measure his opportunity, his guilt, his privilege, or his worth. A society obsessed with sorting people into racial categories should not be surprised when racial division gets worse. The solution isn't pretending history didn't happen. Teach it, all of it. Slavery, Jim Crow, civil rights, the Constitution, the abolitionists, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr. Teach America's sins and teach America's capacity for correction. Then teach children the revolutionary idea America still has not perfectly achieved. You are an individual. Your character matters more than your category. We should all be very concerned with the DEI movement and ideas influenced by critical theories. Now, I want to be precise here. Diversity is not bad. Inclusion is not bad. Treating people fairly is not bad. Those words sound wonderful. The question is, what happens after those words become policies? If diversity means opening the door so qualified people who were unfairly excluded can compete, wonderful. If inclusion means treating every person with dignity, you can sign me up. But if equity means manipulating standards or opportunities to engineer predetermined group outcomes, then we should all stand up and challenge that. And look, if a workplace or a classroom is teaching people primarily to see one another as members of a competing racial, sexual, economic, or political group, I believe they're moving backwards. And yes, reasonable people can disagree about where that line sits. That's precisely why we should be able to debate it in the first place. Instead, too often, merely asking the question gets treated as evidence of bad character. Now, that's not education, that's social enforcement. One of the most dangerous changes in our culture wasn't political, it was linguistic. We began confusing disagreement with harm. Those are not the same thing. If I disagree with you, I have not assaulted you. And if you disagree with me, you have not erased me. If my religious beliefs contradict your beliefs, that does not mean I hate you. And if your worldview contradicts mine, you still have every right to speak. That's freedom. The problem with declaring ideas unsafe simply because they're uncomfortable is that eventually somebody has to decide which ideas are safe. And congratulations, you've just created a free speech referee. Then everybody fights to control the whistle. Here's my solution. Bring back intellectual adulthood. Make your argument, defend it, show your evidence, and then I'll make mine. And if my idea falls apart under scrutiny, I need a better idea. But if your only response is to call me a name so you don't have to answer the argument, I'm not intimidated by that. Being offended by an argument does not make you right, and being uncomfortable with the truth does not make the truth disappear. A free people have to be strong enough to hear things they don't like. Otherwise, freedom eventually becomes whatever the most easily offended person in the room will permit. Now, let me bring the church into this, because Christians don't get to point at Washington, Hollywood, universities, corporations, social media, and everybody else and say, look what they did. What were we doing? That question bothers me because according to Pew Research Center's latest religious landscape study, 62% of American adults still identify as Christian. That's down substantially from 78% in 2007, but it still means Christianity is hardly some tiny fringe religion in America. So if roughly 6 out of 10 adults call themselves Christians, how did Christianity become so timid in large parts of the public square? We need to ask that question. And no, I'm not calling for a theocracy. I don't want government running Christianity. Trust me, Washington has enough trouble delivering the mail. I'm talking about Christians behaving like Christians everywhere, not just on Sunday between the opening hymn and the closing prayer. I think parts of the American church made a terrible trade. We wanted to be liked. We wanted the culture to see us as reasonable, modern, welcoming, non-judgmental. And there's nothing wrong with being welcoming. Jesus met people where they were. but he didn't leave truth outside because truth might hurt attendance. There is a difference between welcoming people and surrendering conviction. And too many Christians have become frightened of being called intolerant, hateful, political, judgmental, backwards, or even extreme. So we softened the message, then softened it again, then sometimes stop talking about difficult things altogether. And here's the consequence. When the church becomes afraid to challenge the culture eventually starts discipling the church. That's backwards. The solution isn't angry Christianity. It's courageous Christianity. Love people, serve people, feed people, help people, pray for people, and tell them about Jesus. And when the culture tells you that biblical conviction has become unacceptable, stand anyways. If your faith only works when the culture applauds it, that isn't conviction. That's a popularity contest with worship music. And while we're talking about consequences, let's talk about family. I understand this is sensitive. Families come in every imaginable circumstance. Divorce happens, death happens, abandonment happens, and people make mistakes. There are single mothers and single fathers doing heroic work every day, and they deserve encouragement, not condemnation. But compassion for difficult circumstances does not require us pretending family structure is irrelevant. It isn't. The Census Bureau has documented enormous long-term changes in children's living arrangements. In 1968, about 85% of American children lived with two parents. By 2020, that figure was about 70%. In 2023, the Census Bureau estimated 9.8 million one-parent households. That doesn't mean every child in a one-parent household fails. Of course they don't. And it doesn't mean every two-parent household is healthy. It does mean family stability matters. We have spent decades talking as if pointing that out is somehow judgmental. Why? Here's something our culture needs to hear. You cannot spend decades treating marriage as disposable, fathers as optional, motherhood as somehow lesser than a career, masculinity as inherently suspicious, and commitment as something you keep only while it feels good, and then act astonished when families become less stable. That's not judgment, that's cause and effect. And again, I'm not beating up on single parents here. Some of the strongest people I know have carried families alone because somebody else abandoned their responsibility. I'm talking about the culture creating the abandonment. We should never shame the person carrying the weight. We should shame the culture that tells people the weight doesn't matter. What's the solution? Make commitment honorable again. Make fatherhood honorable. Make motherhood honorable. And make marriage worth fighting for. Teach boys that becoming a man means assuming responsibility, not escaping it. Teach girls that expecting character from a man isn't oppression. And teach both that children are not inconveniences orbiting adult happiness. Strong families don't guarantee a strong country. But try maintaining a strong country for very long without strong families, I say good luck. And this is where prosperity enters the conversation, because prosperity isn't just GDP. It's not the stock market, and it's not whether your 401k went up this quarter. Prosperity is the ability of people to build productive, meaningful, and increasingly secure lives. That requires skills, work, trust, stable institutions, families, capital, and property rights. It's the freedom and responsibility and hope that if I sacrifice today, tomorrow can actually be better. That last part is incredibly important because when people stop believing effort improves their future, alternatives start looking attractive, including socialism. Gallup reported in 2025 that 54% of Americans had a positive view of capitalism, while 39% had a positive view of socialism. That is not a majority for socialism, but 4 out of 10 viewing it favorably should get the attention of anyone who believes free enterprise matters. And look, yelling, "You stupid socialist," isn't going to change one mind. We need to understand why the sales pitch works. You know where socialism finds fertile soil? Where people stop believing the system rewards effort. If a 25-year-old works hard, gets educated, or learns a trade, does everything everybody told him to do, and still believes he'll never afford a house, you can lecture him about capitalism until your face turns blue. He's frustrated, and some of that frustration is justified. That's exactly why cronyism is so dangerous. When government protects insiders, subsidizes favorites, manipulates markets, buries small business under complexity, spends beyond reason, and then hands ordinary Americans the consequences, people start blaming free markets for a game that wasn't truly free. Then socialism arrives like a crooked mechanic saying, "Hey, your engine runs badly. I'll fix it by setting the entire car on fire." No. The answer to corrupted capitalism is not socialism. It's less corruption and more competition. Break up the sweetheart relationships. Expose the subsidies. Simplify the rules. Protect property. We need to encourage entrepreneurship and let failure fail and let success compete. That will give young Americans a reason to believe building something still matters. If we want to defeat socialism, we have to do more than insult socialists. We have to make freedom believable again. All right, that's the first half of this conversation. We keep backing up on faith, on family, on standards, on personal responsibility, on free enterprise, and on the idea that disagreement is part of freedom. And every one of those compromises seemed survivable by itself, but culture has compound interest. The question is, what happens when all those little compromises mature at the same time? Okay, after the break, we're going to take a look at that invoice. Institutional distrust, dependency, economic frustration, a church that has lost cultural confidence, a country where people increasingly don't trust one another or institutions supposedly serving them. And then we're going to do something. I think that's far more important than complaining about it. We're going to talk about how to start rebuilding. I'm your host, George Hayes. I will be right back.
You're listening to the George Hayes Radio Podcast.
I want to take a moment to talk about something important, and that is the blueprint to success. A lot of people think it's some great secret, or that success is reserved for the lucky few. Let me be clear, it's not about luck. It is about the choices you make every single day. Are you investing in yourself? Are you surrounding yourself with the right people? Are you taking action even when it feels uncomfortable? That is what success looks like. Showing up, doing the work, and staying focused on your goals. That's why the George Hayes Radio Podcast exists. We're here to give you the tools and motivation to take that next step, no matter what that might be. So here's what I want you to do. First, hit that subscribe button. Second, go to hayesnation.com to join a community of people just like you, folks who know that success doesn't happen by accident. And finally, Share this episode with someone who needs to hear this message. Keep doing the work. Stay focused. Surround yourself with the right people, and your success story will happen.
Hayes. The George Hayes Radio Podcast wants to hear from you. Tell us what motivates you or describe that obstacle standing in your way. You could be featured on an upcoming episode. Send your story via email to georgehayes@usa.com. That's georgehayes@usa.com.
Okay, well, welcome back to the show. Hey, if you want to reach out to me, it's georgehayes@usa.com. That's georgehayes@usa.com. I want to hear your stories, and who knows, maybe I will feature you on an upcoming episode. The bill for our current culture has come due with compound interest, and I mean that. Ideas that seem once abstract eventually become behaviors. Behaviors become expectations. Expectations become institutions. Institutions influence laws. These laws then affect families. Families then shape children. Children inherit the culture. That's why ideas matter. Bad ideas rarely stay in a philosophy book. Eventually, they show up at your kitchen table. And one of the clearest signs that something has gone extremely wrong in America is trust. Gallup reported in July 2026 that average confidence across American institutions remained below 30% for the fifth consecutive year. Think about that. Government, media, institutions, churches, schools, business. People increasingly look at organizations around them and wonder, are these people actually serving me or serving themselves? That is dangerous territory for any republic. A free country runs on more than laws. It runs on trust. I have to trust that contracts mean something, that elections matter, that courts follow the law. It needs trust that businesses generally deliver what they promise, that schools educate children instead of using them as political projects. It also means trust that churches preach conviction instead of chasing cultural approval, and government officials aren't simply using public office to reward friends and punish enemies. When that trust disappears, what replaces it? Suspicion, conspiracy, anger, cynicism. And eventually, people start looking for strong institutions to force everybody else in line. That's the terrible irony. The less people trust institutions, the more vulnerable they become to people promising even more institutional power. So how do we fix that? Not with another slogan. Earn the trust back. Transparent government. Accountable churches, honest businesses, and parents involved in schools. We need citizens who know what's happening locally, leaders willing to admit mistakes and consequences when people abuse authority. Trust cannot be commanded. It has to be deserved. Here's another part of the culture bill that has come due: dependency. Now, whenever I use that word, somebody thinks I'm talking about poor people receiving government assistance. I'm not. America has dependency at every level. A corporation depending on a federal subsidy is dependency. A bank expecting taxpayers to rescue reckless decisions is dependency. An industry lobbying government to protect it from competition is dependency. A citizen structuring his entire life around government benefits can become dependency. A university living off government money while charging astronomical tuition, that can be part of dependency. Cronyism is dependency wearing a suit, and socialism is dependency turning into a governing philosophy. My standard is the same regardless of whether you're wearing work boots or a $5,000 suit. Adults and institutions should carry as much responsibility for their own choices as reasonably possible. Now, I get irritated when politicians lecture poor Americans about dependency while writing checks to billion-dollar corporations. Give me a break. If a struggling family receives temporary help, we're told that's welfare. If a giant corporation receives a subsidy, suddenly it's an economic development incentive. Same government, different vocabulary. I'm against dependency as a principle, not as a social class. There are legitimate times to help people. Christians should help people. Communities should help people. And there are circumstances where government has a role in protecting people who truly cannot protect themselves. But help should aim toward restoration whenever restoration is possible. Compassion that never expects recovery can quietly become captivity. The solution is not cruelty. The solution is a ladder, a hand up, not a hand out. Help somebody stand. Help them learn. Help them work. Help them build. Help them become independent enough that one day they can turn around and help somebody else. That's dignity. Whether you're a citizen or a corporation, if your prosperity depends permanently on a politician's favor, you're not operating in a free market. You're operating in a relationship, and taxpayers are paying for dinner. Now, let me speak directly to Christians again, because this is where the episode has to become personal. It is easy to watch television and blame the culture. Who is the culture? Well, we are. Culture is millions of individual decisions multiplied over time. What do you tolerate? What do you watch? What do you buy? What do you laugh at? What do you teach your children? And where do you spend your time? Do you know your neighbors? Do you know what's happening at your child's school? Do you really know what your church believes? Do you vote? Do you attend local meetings? And the list continues. Do you help people? Do you build anything? Do you speak when speaking costs something? Or do you shake your head at the television and call that civic engagement? Because it isn't. Here's something conservatives, Christians, and everybody else needs to understand. Washington is not coming to save your family. Congress cannot make your marriage stronger. The president cannot make your son responsible. The Supreme Court cannot make your daughters courageous, and the governor cannot make your church preach the gospel. And no executive order can make you put your phone down and have dinner with your children. Government matters, elections matter, policy matters. We need to vote and participate to fight the corruption. Stop outsourcing the culture to politicians and then complain about what they deliver. If you want stronger families, build one. If you want stronger churches, become a stronger Christian. If you want responsible children, raise them. Look, if you want better communities, know your neighbors. If you want capitalism to work, build honest businesses and demand government stop rigging the game. If you want freedom to survive, practice the responsibility freedom requires. The solution to cultural decline isn't one heroic politician. It's millions of ordinary people becoming difficult to corrupt, difficult to intimidate, and difficult to make dependent. That's how you change a country. That's the part I don't want lost in all of this, because outrage is addictive. And I refuse to build a show around keeping people permanently angry. Anger has purpose. If somebody's hurting your family, anger should tell you something needs defending. If government is corrupt, anger may motivate reform. If your church abandons truth, anger may push you to speak. But anger is fuel. It's not a destination. Eventually, you have to use that fuel to go somewhere. That's where rebuilding enters this story. And rebuilding doesn't start someday after America gets fixed. You start while it's broken. You build while you're fighting. That's actually the setup for where I want to go in the next episode. But before we get there, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. Every generation receives something from the generation before it. Some inherit money, some inherit debt, some inherit businesses, some inherit problems. Every American generation inherits a country it did not create. The question is what condition we leave it in. I don't expect to leave my children a perfect America. My parents didn't leave me one. Their parents didn't leave one for them. That's really not the standard. The question is whether we leave the next generation something stronger than our excuses. Did we defend freedom? Did we teach faith? Did we build families? Did we confront corruption? Did we tell young people the truth about socialism? Did we defend the opportunity? Did we admit where capitalism had been corrupted by government favoritism? Did we participate, or did we spend 30 years whispering somebody ought to do something about that? Culture sends invoices, and the ugliest thing one generation can do is run up the bill and leave its children at the table when the check arrives. So here's the solution. We pick up our part now. We rebuild. We take a stand and we speak up. We serve, we vote, we teach, we create, we worship, and we work. And where we discover something worth preserving, we stop apologizing for preserving it. So what does rebuilding America actually look like? Well, we rebuild conviction. Know what you believe. Not what your political party told you, not what your favorite television host told you, and certainly not what TikTok told you. What do you actually believe? For me, that begins with God. My rights ultimately don't come from government. My value isn't bestowed by Washington. Government has an important role, but government isn't God. Once you understand that, political disagreement starts looking a little different. Politicians become public servants again instead of saviors. That's healthy. We must rebuild the family. If you're married, fight harder for your marriage than the culture fights to distract you from it. If you're a father, be there. Not merely financially, be there. Teach, discipline, encourage, protect, and listen. If you're a mother, understand that raising human beings is not some consolation prize because you didn't become CEO. You are shaping the next generation. That's an enormous and important role. If we are to change this culture, we need to build competence. Our children do not need another excuse. They need skills. Teach them how money works. Teach them how credit works. Teach them to change a flat tire. Teach them how to speak to adults. Teach them to show up on time. Teach them that feelings are real, but feelings don't make decisions for you. Teach them how to lose. Teach them how to fail. Teach them how to get back up. Participation trophies don't prepare people for markets, marriages, or mortgages. Life keeps score. Better to learn how to compete with character. We need to rebuild economic independence. Get out of unnecessary debt. Build savings. Own assets. Learn valuable skills. Start something if you're called to start something. Stop buying those things to impress people who aren't paying your bills. Prosperity isn't greed. Prosperity gives you options. It lets you help people. It lets you withstand bad employers. It lets you withstand bad economies. It makes you harder to control. And finally, we need to rebuild civic courage. Know who's sitting on your city council. Know who's on your school board. Know your state representatives. We must vote in elections that don't have presidential candidates at the top of the ticket. Local matters more. Speak respectfully but clearly. Support leaders who display courage. And hold your own side accountable when they're wrong, especially when it's your own side. Because hypocrisy does not become virtue simply because the hypocrite has the right bumper sticker. All right, I started today by saying the bill for cultural surrender is due. I think the bill is sitting on the table. We have declining trust, weak institutions, family instability, economic frustration, political hatred, and a confused generation. The church is trying to figure out whether cultural acceptance matters more than biblical conviction. And Americans are increasingly tempted by political promises that tell somebody else to carry the cost. These are real problems. But listen, a bill is not a death certificate. America has faced enormous problems before. This country fought a civil war, survived a depression, defeated fascism, confronted segregation, endured wars, riots, political assassinations, economic collapses, terrorism, and pandemics. And plenty of politicians who assured us they alone knew how to fix everything. We're still here. So I'm not interested in surrender. I'm interested in repentance where repentance is necessary, reform where reform is necessary, resistance where resistance is necessary, and rebuilding everywhere we possibly can. So we surrendered cultural ground. Fine. Take it back by living differently. Build stronger families. Build stronger churches. Build stronger businesses. Build stronger communities. And build stronger people. Speak the truth. Fight corruption. Challenge bad ideas, win hearts and minds, and remember something. The American dream was never supposed to be something government delivered to your front porch. It was freedom to build, to work, to worship, to own, to create, to fail, to recover, to succeed, and to leave something behind. Our freedom is still worth defending, but defense isn't passive. So, what are you actually going to do about it? All right. Until next time, keep the faith, protect your freedom, build prosperity, and for heaven's sake, stop backing down and stand. All right. I want to hear from you. Was this episode helpful? Comment and tell me. You can reach me at georgehayes@usa.com. And leave me a comment on YouTube. Which point hit you the hardest and what are you going to do about it? Thank you for being part of the Hayes Nation. New episodes drop every Monday morning on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you have not, and share this one because somebody in your life may be feeling like the ground is moving underneath them and wondering whether anything they do still matters. They need to hear this message. Surrender is a choice, and so is rebuilding. And remember, keep that train rolling down the track because that light at the end of the tunnel might just be you. I'll see you next time.
It's time to smash that like button and subscribe. To share or leave comments, log on to YouTube at the George Hayes Radio Podcast or visit us online at HayesNation.com.